I think for the last 2 or 3 years in these CBAC meetings, I have been doing a lot of talking and a lot of presenting. And I'm going to try something a little bit different today. And we're going to ask for a lot of kind of input from CBAC on where you might want to go with some of this research. And as we get into, I've got 9 or 10 slides to show you the types of data that we can dig into, some of the types of visualizations that we can create. But ultimately, I want to hear from you on where you want to dig, the things that you're interested in looking at, the things that you think the community is interested in telling a story to council about, or researching and or validating some of the things that you think may be true or not true about how subpopulations feel. So again, I've got some stuff I want to share. I want y'all to unmute and ask questions as we're on a slide. What can we do here? What type of data can we look at? And then ultimately, the gentleman who in our office who is responsible for the resident survey and who has built the Power BI dashboard that we have available is coming back from paternity leave on Monday. And so I'm going to take a lot of the questions and direction that CBAC provides today, and we're going to build specific visualizations just for you that we haven't done for the public to answer the questions that you want to see. And overall, and we'll talk about this with the idea being of what of this data is actionable? What would you want to look at potentially making recommendations to city council about specific areas? I will tell you, for someone like me, I can get really nerdy really quickly looking at the data, and there's some really cool things to look at, but we have to pull ourselves back and often ask the question, that's a very interesting data point, but what does it mean if I were to give it to someone? Can a department do something with that? Can the city council make a specific recommendation or a change to a service that improves that quality of service, either overall or for that subpopulation? And so I'm going to screen share. I'm going to start through some things. And again, I want you guys, if you would please unmute anywhere you have a question, you want to dig somewhere. I've actually got the survey or dashboard up in the background and may do some real-time answering of questions. And then we're going to get to the end of these 9, 10, 11 slides. And I'm going to very specifically ask a couple of different ways, where do you want to dig? Now, I know ultimately what you're looking for is tell me all the places in which any of the demographic data suggests that there's a statistically significant variance between the respondents. And we can do that and show you a lot of that. I also don't want to overload you with data. I'm going to show you kind of what ETC gives us and what we can put together, but we could spend days and days and days reviewing a lot of this data. But I want to try to get to the points that are either interesting points for the CBAC, or to come back specifically, we can just rank order and show you where things are statistically different on different metrics. So having said all that, before we get started, are there any questions?
Yes, Scott. Could you, just to orient us a little bit, could you talk more broadly about the budget process? Where are departments in setting their own budgets and how do they do that? And just to know kind of where our recommendations would come into the process.
Absolutely. So budget process from a very high level really has started earlier for us than it has in the past calendar wise. So we start asking departments for what their FY 26-27 requests are going to be. We start doing that in October now. They are required to submit that both from an operating perspective and a capital perspective in, I'm going to call it late November, early December. Budget sits down and goes through the higher level questions that we can tease out that may need to be addressed to city council. And we go to that January retreat with city council and say, essentially, this is kind of what the base budget looks like from an inflationary perspective. Here are some of your major pressures, whether it be on, for us right now, the personnel side, labor costs are going to be a huge issue going into FY 27. We've got a 1/3 study of class and compensation that we're looking at. We have rising healthcare costs, which you guys are going to hear a lot about here in the next couple of months. We started that conversation with city council, but we'll continue it. And I can dive into the details if y'all want to hear more about that, probably more appropriate in kind of the April timeframe to do that. We've got pension costs from the state. We are on the state-run pension system, and they kind of just tell us what we're paying in. We don't really have a choice for that. We also do have a separately local-run pension system just for law enforcement officers. But our personnel costs are going to be one of the major driving factors. They're 67% of general fund, but they're also increasing at a higher clip than probably what you would see in the private sector right now. But we pull all that together, show it to council in January. In February, the city manager has individual budget meetings with every single department. And so he spends about half of that time asking them about goals, objectives, and performance data, where they're currently at, where they're expecting to be going, what is their work plan going to look like for next year, and how does that tie to city council strategic priorities? And then the next couple of weeks are really where we are refining revenue estimates, taking the things that we've heard from those meetings, working with the management team on refining what is actually going to make it in or out of the budget process. To be perfectly honest, we've been in this position for a while, but we have put a lot of pressure on property taxes, particularly residential property taxes. So there's a lot of what does city council want to see in a budget proposal, and also trying to feel out how do they feel the resident is going to respond to potential tax increases continuing to come. But we kind of build the budget through March. It's in publication in April. The 300 plus page document is probably the most manual process anyone has ever seen. We are potentially looking at things in the future to automate that, but it is very much a document that is built section by section in Microsoft Word, using Excel to extract things directly out of the finance system, and it's a formatting nightmare. But it takes us several weeks just to, once it's balanced, to just stop everything, produce the document, all the tables, all the budget highlights, that kind of stuff. And it's at that point we'll start telling departments the decisions that have been made by management on what's in the proposed budget. It will then go to city council in early May. They have 3 or 4 workshops and a public hearing, and it'll go in June. So we have the last departmental meeting with the city manager, with our field operations department, that's streets, stormwater, with Keith Huff. That is Friday morning or afternoon, and we will have completed all of those departmental meetings with the city manager. So we are kind of at the point where we're taking in the last bit of information from those conversations. We are going to show the city manager, and I will tell this group, this is a great opportunity to get the word out on the front end. There is no way to balance the base budget without a property tax increase. It is simply not going to happen. And so the question then becomes, how many of council's strategic priorities are we trying to get into the proposed budget? And then also, where can we find efficiencies where we can help offset some of those increases in labor by using a different type of equipment, changing our overtime practices. So we've got a few of those things that we're working through with departments as well. This information from a resident survey perspective, we always try to give to city council very early in a budget process, right after it comes. So they saw a lot of this again in January, and we try to get them to focus on it at a much higher level than what we're going to do with you here over the next couple of months. It is very much a, what does the entire community think? And of those, what are the top priorities in the community? Whereas we are going to dive in and say, okay, what are the top priorities, but how do those look different geographically? How do those look differently for age groups? I am interested in, to the extent that we can find places that CBAC may want to make those recommendations. And we're going to talk about this at the end. I think there are 3 things that come out of this from a resident survey data perspective, filtering into budget and operations. The first is departmental knowledge. Is a department aware that there are subpopulations or groups that have different perceptions of the services they are providing? And so the first thing is to give the departments that information so they're aware of it when they talk to people or when they think about planning their services for future years. A great example of this would be in recreation. Are there specific rec center areas by ward? Are there specific populations, youth, ethnic or race, where William Royston, who's our recreation director, might know some of that information and think, it seems very interesting in this area. There's a lower perception of rec center programming. Should I be looking at maybe making some changes? And I'm just going to say, Sprague, Miller Park, wherever that is. So it's kind of just the departmental knowledge of it. The second piece is working with marketing and the departments is communication changes. Are there things where we see where we would actually communicate what we do differently, either communicate it more or less, or change the way in which we communicate? So we do ask a lot of questions about how people get their information, how they want to get their information, and then we can actually break all of those questions down by, is there a difference by age group, or is there a difference by geography? Usually doesn't play into that one as much, but we have conversations with how should you be telling your story? You hear a lot, recreation is a great example of this too. I didn't know that was available. All right. Which people are saying that they don't get the recreation communications? Is there a way to go in, and whether it's working through your social media platforms and doing ad buys in specific geographies or in specific communities that match the demographics you're looking at, you start changing the way you communicate what you're doing, but not the actual service. And then the third component is a service change. And whether that's a department recommending it based on the data, or you telling city council, we see this and potentially think you should look at a service change. That's when you get to that level of, and these are very interesting conversations of, how do we use that data to potentially actually change the format of a service for someone? I will tell you, a lot of times we go to the police or public safety data to look at that. The police department is using a very robust data set of where crime is actually taking place for how they station and move people within the beats and districts. And so we've talked about this, we've never done it, and this may be something we look at. You overlay, where are those actual crimes happening, and do they map up with the perception of crime in the community or safety in the community over those areas? We haven't done that before. When Brandon comes back on Monday, again, if that's something y'all want to look at, we can actually overlay those and see, is where police is responding to calls, does that match where people actually feel less safe, kind of thing. What that would more likely do for the police department is change some of their community resource unit activities and how they do, not responding to calls, obviously, but how they would do the community policing effort on the front end and some of their prevention efforts, where they might want to be more visible. And I'll show you that question. We actually ask in the resident survey your perception of police visibility in your neighborhood. And so we know and can look at by geography, by race, by age, all that kind of stuff, how those people feel. And again, we can give that to the police chief and he can use it as he sees fit. Or you could potentially, in looking at some of this data over the next couple of months, have recommendations to city council that says, we see something we think is significant in this data, and we would be very interested in having the police department look at X, Y, and Z, present something to city council on how they might change an operation or a communication strategy or something to that effect. So that was me rambling for 5 or 8 minutes. I hope that I hit both kind of the calendar and the data usage piece, but happy to stop there and get into the weeds more if that's what you're looking for, or if that kind of answers the question, let me know.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Anybody else with anything before we get started here? All right, I'm going to say I think this is either going to go really well and hopefully extremely well or not. I've got a few slides. I want to introduce you to the kind of data we've got. This is not a holistic. I started going through and pulling all the places where there are changes, and I thought to myself, this is going to be a 500 slide PowerPoint. And before I do that to you guys on February, we may come back in March and do this to you. But I wanted to get your input on specific places that you wanted to look at. So I'm going to try to do a screen share, talk about cross-tabular data, what it is, the different visuals that we currently have, and then also things that we can build for you. So I am, and Sarah Manus, please let me know if this works correctly. We've tried it once. So I'm going to screen share. Hopefully you're seeing a blue looking rose. And now hopefully you are seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Are we good? Thumbs up? Yes? Okay, very good. All right. So we talked about this last month, and I think some of you are probably very familiar with research methods and data. But when we say cross-tabular data, that's kind of just a buzzword that means we're looking at different parts of the information that we provide. And I've put up here in bullet points the things that specifically when we get the report from our vendor who is ETC, and you can see that on the left, that looks just like the report I showed you last month, but you see that word cross-tabular data on it. That is a 400-page PDF, and it is 400 pages of nothing but data tables. And it takes a significant amount of time to go through. Like I said, we have received this. Brandon has been looking through both this and using the dashboard before he went out on parental leave. He'll be coming back. But we look at the major demographics here. Are there differences in how people respond to this based on age?
Hey,
Are there
Scott,
different? Yeah, absolutely. What's up?
can we get a copy of this?
Absolutely, sure. I will tell
I'm
you
not
what.
promising I'll read all 400 pages, but it would be nice to see.
So I will send you all the cross-tabular data. I'm going to show you actually on the next slide what it's like a screenshot of what it looks like and explain it so that we could send it to you right after this. I could have Sarah send it to you in the middle of the meeting, but it would be mildly distracting to try and open it. But yes, we are absolutely going to send it to you. And then hopefully the conversation is how can we visualize it for you so that it doesn't look like this? But gender identity is one that we look at. Resident longevity, the survey actually asked how long have you lived in the city of Winston-Salem? There are differences in how people respond to things based on how long they have lived in Winston-Salem and what their history of the community is. So sometimes it's very interesting to see that data, obviously by household income. And then we look at race and ethnicity, generally speaking, and I'm going to talk to this group kind of colloquially. When we have those questions, people generally are asking, white or Caucasian, Black African American, those with Latino ethnicity, Hispanic ethnicity, excuse me, or other. And I'm going to show you some of that broken down. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the term Black to mean African American. I'm going to use the term white to mean Caucasian. But there are different races and ethnicities that we look at. And then the one that we try to stay away from as much as possible with city councils sometimes, because of the way they're elected, is the ward or geography-based piece of this. Now, I will tell you, we can do geographic distributions of the data differently than on a ward basis. We get a file from ETC that does not give us a data point of address, but it gives us a data point within a census block so that we know the general area that a respondent comes from. So we could actually do geography-based analysis and not use ward shape files for this. But council always asks for it, right? So we're always going to default back to they want to know what's happening in their ward. I'm going to stop here and also say, this is my general disclaimer. The data that we get has at a community-wide level, a 3% margin of error. As you dive down further and further into the data, the margin of error goes up. And depending on how many respondents there are, it can go up exponentially. And so we have to be very careful. I can tell you what the respondents said, but when I think about how does the community feel about the police department, I know generally speaking how the entire community feels. When I go down to the ward level and I say, how does just this ward feel? Or when I ask, how do Black people versus white people feel? That margin of error increases from 3% to 10 plus very quickly because that sample population and the sample that we have from it are very different than the overall population. We can get into the statistics of that if needed, but my general guardrail comment is when you look at the lower level of the data, it does not have the same margin of error. It does not have the same statistical significance as at a community-wide level. So I'll stop kicking that dead horse and we'll move on. I will also say here, we do have other things. These are the ones that ETC provides. Again, you can provide us direction that you want to see other types of data, and I'll tell you kind of what we've got access to. So the two ways that we do this, very simple. Again, one, the 400-page report from ETC, and the other is the dashboard that we have built from the data set. Again, I'll keep harping. Brandon will be back next month from parental leave, but he has built a very robust dashboard. We're also going to talk, probably not in this meeting, but down the road. There are two formats of that dashboard. There is one for internal services, which is kind of the staff data mining analysis piece, and there's an external piece. We are going to load the 2025 data into the external portal next week and give you access to it and let you go through it and then ask for some feedback on what would you like to see the community have more access to or more functionality in for them to look at the data as well. but those are two ways. So what does the ETC report look like? This is the top of page 1 of the cross-tabular data report. It is 387 pages of this. This is what you are going to see. What makes it very difficult to use is that when we talk about when someone is satisfied or dissatisfied or excellent, good, below average, that type of thing, in our reporting and in the summary reporting by ETC, we add categories together. So I would add excellent and good together, and I would add below average and poor together and call those kind of good and not good or poor. The same thing on the satisfaction side. It's all on a Likert scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is very satisfied, 4 is satisfied, 3 is neutral, 2 is dissatisfied, and 1 is very dissatisfied. We add the 1s and 2s together and call that dissatisfaction, and we add the 4s and 5s together and call that satisfaction. So the tabular data gives you a granular look at just the data itself. But even someone who likes data tables, this is mostly useless in terms of identifying things at different levels. They will put in little things, and I could show you this on pages that says that stand out. This is statistically significant and different from the rest of it to draw your attention to certain things. But it's very difficult to look at these tables. We will provide them to you. I will allow you to go through them. But again, our goal is to take this information, give it to you in a format where you can actually see it better. So what does it look like and what can we do with that in the dashboards itself? And so I want to think about this a couple of ways, and I'm going to show you a couple of different data points. I'm going to show you one for one purpose and then tell you, take it with a grain of salt and never talk about it again. But on the left, we can do this by every single question. There's 140 plus questions in the survey, and we can cut this and tell you all the way down what did individual races think, what did geographies think, age group, gender, all of that. And I think that's what people are most familiar with is what does a question look like? I'm going to show you what does it look like when we aggregate all of the data together, which is a very interesting way to look at it, but doesn't have a lot of useful purpose other than thinking at a high level. The reason I'm going to tell you that is I think there's a lot of thought in the community that different races have just vastly different perceptions of city services. And it's not true to the extent that sometimes if you just read social media or talk with different groups, you would see. So I'm going to show you some data just at a super high level that's not reflective of departmental performance, but just overall perceptions of everything that we do. We can then, again, in a dashboard, I can show you the perceptions of a service area. I can tell you on average how people rated their perception, not just of visibility of police in a neighborhood, but of overall police services, visibility of police, crime prevention as an index measure. Again, I do think you have to get down to the individual question to know what you're looking at, but that goes back to that. We're able to look at and say, are there specific areas or other demographics that have paint a different portrait of an entire service area? Are people more mad, not just about sidewalk maintenance, but just transportation infrastructure in general kind of thing? So we can do that for you. And then the other thing, one of the other things I'll show you that we've done is you can rank all of these. What are the highest rated and least rated from a satisfaction perspective? And you can clip and sort those by demographics. Or again, I'll go back to, and I think we hear this a lot from a race-based perspective of there are vastly different ideas of what would be the highest or least perceived service. I'm going to show you some of that data, and it's not, I'll show you any level of it you want to see, but you probably don't see as much variation as people think you're going to see. So here is what I'm going to show you, and I'm sorry if you have to zoom in or lean into your computer to see this. I'm going to talk about this for about 3 minutes. I'm never going to show it to you again, and I'm going to tell you take it completely with a grain of salt. This is the total average perception of every single question that we ask in the entire survey across every service area, cut by different demographics. So in the top left corner, we have it by race or ethnicity: Hispanic, other, Black, and white. And if you just take, again, the average perception of everything, so One race could be more on one and less on another, but if you take the average perception, there is almost no variation in the respondent data. We don't have this African Americans or Hispanics as a group are every service that we provide, they have a lower perception of. And I think that is something that we have to kind of combat perception wise. Same thing when you look at age groups, you do see a little bit of variation in the age groups. I will tell you the 18 to 24 group is the smallest group. So we do have to be very careful when we're looking at the 18 to 24 data. There's not very many folks that respond to the survey in that. Again, years of residency is interesting. Not a whole bunch of change there. You got a high of 52 and a half and a low of 48. And then obviously by ward, which has the largest spread, which this again, when we show it to city council, we have to be very careful. They will entrench and they'll start to ask us, okay, I want to see every single question and how my word is different. I have to push back to them and say, again, you've got to think about the level of statistical significance that's in this when you start asking for it by group. But you can see what our perceived differences, and in general, again, potentially the higher income areas, which would be our north and northwest, northwest and west wards, have a overall aggregated data higher sense of satisfaction and overall quality of life than some of the other wards. So I say that just to say we can take data at any level. You don't see as much variation in the race or ethnicity data. You do see a little more by ward, and I bet if I took that ward one and I did it by income, it would probably distribute similarly because some of that is income related. This is where I say don't ever look at this data again because it's questions across all service areas aggregated together. I just wanted to show you at a high level some of the things that we think don't play out the way that we think that they do. And again, note on the bottom right, most of what I'm going to show you today with one caveat is satisfaction data, which is a 4 and a 5 added together or a good and an excellent added together.
Scott, real quick.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that we had a lower participation rate from our 18 to 24 group. And I think we covered this last week. Was there any significant difference by ward for participation?
So a little bit, but not really significant.
Large.
Yeah, so we require 100 responses per ward, and we get just over 1,000. You do get, generally speaking, we are waiting to get a couple of the wards to get their 100th one when a couple of the wards already have 114 or 120 or something like that.
Right.
So there's no vast difference. We make them account for it in the sample, and they actually oversample certain areas. Quite frankly, the areas that have more rental housing and the areas that have lower incomes generally have lower response rates. So they will oversample those areas to get to the minimum of 100 responses per ward in those areas.
Thanks.
Yep. So just as a note, so you kind of all that aggregated data, what does it look like at a city perspective? We'll throw it away. This is the first question that we ask on the resident survey, just kind of as a checkpoint for that is, what is your perception of the city as a place to live? And you can see there is a little bit of variation here. The other category being so much higher is interesting, but between, again, Black, white, and Hispanic, there's a 5% difference there, and that is way under the statistical significance threshold, the margin of error. So there's really not a lot of variation there at all. And again, when we look at it by ward, you see interestingly here, the wards with the highest perception of the city as a place to live are actually not wards that are in the higher income areas that you would have thought, generally speaking. So again, we can pull this information and sort it any way you want, but I want to show you a couple of examples of that. Again, here from 77 to 85, you're getting towards that kind of, is it really a statistically significant difference? There are response differences, but you just have to be very careful. I think when we see above a 10% difference, we start to take notice, but inside that realm of 10% is, some of it is just the variation in the folks that you asked. So we can ask at a super high level, We can ask at this departmental level. I didn't put these into bar charts, left them in the kind of tabular form for you. But if I take all of, as I suggested, all of the police related questions and I just merge them together and say, what is the overall perception? We do see a statistically significant difference in what the bottom ward at that 10% level, if we're calling it 10%. So it's 1% outside of that next margin of error. But from 45 to 56, there's what we would call, there's a difference there. If you go over to the race or ethnicity, again, other further down is interesting, but you don't really see that in the 47 to 53 range. So these are the types of areas where I would say when we get outside of that 10%, we would be showing you data, digging a little further into that, and you would potentially be looking at recommendations to city council if you wanted to, about either A, digging further there, or B, looking at service level changes. Fred, I saw you unmute. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was actually looking to see how to raise my hand, but I can't see it here. How big is other compared to black, white, and Hispanic?
Very small. I have in the background and can pull that up for you. The population, so we've got to remember here too, when we do this, we've got to be very careful that it doesn't add up to 100%. When you do the Hispanic folks, you have people. Yeah. But the other categories, if I go in here, give me just 1 second. I'll actually pull the dashboard up in the background. So if we do Native American, multiracial, Asian Indian, or American Indian and Alaska Natives, it's 31 out of over 1,000 respondents. So it's a very.
I mean, can we really draw any conclusions from the others then? Because that's so few. I mean,
right. The margin of error on that one is going to be so significant that it's
be huge.
Not going to be able to. Yeah.
Okay.
We generally speaking, we put that everything into another category just to show it. But you're correct. The sample there is so small that drawing something from that is going to be very difficult. I will tell you, these are screenshots out of the dashboard. This is the individual question, visibility of police in your neighborhood. So not only can I tell you what it looks like by race, and in this case, I've taken just Black or African American respondents and just white or Caucasian respondents, but we can trend the difference over time in what that looks like, in our subpopulations changing potentially in what their viewpoint looks like. The interesting takeaway from this is that over time, since we started doing these, you can see on the right, we've actually had a larger decline in the satisfaction percentage for visibility of police in neighborhoods amongst the white population rather than the Black population. What we also do, and this is an opportunity for me to explain this, is you can look at the dissatisfaction too. Sometimes what you see as a change in satisfaction, you'll see this increase in neutral. That can be reflective in some questions of an actual decrease in satisfaction, and in some questions it can be reflective of people just don't really know. And so you have to kind of look at it on a question by question basis, how that's playing out. I will say we do see interesting things pop up in the data where you see dissatisfaction with visibility of police in neighborhood. We saw a pretty significant increase from the African American or Black population along the time when the George Floyd things were happening. So we do see also national events pop into what is local data, and we assume things like that. But we can take any of the information that you want and trend the demographics of it over time as well if you want to see that. This is the part where I stop and say, if I were to do this, I would provide you 20,000 data visualizations of what every individual question looks like, trended over time by every demographic that we showed you on the first page. So we're going to spend some time at the end talking about where do we actually want to mine the data? Where do you want to see some of this stuff so that we can focus more interestingly or more heavily in areas that are of interest. But we can do this. Again, I can do it for any question, and I can do it for any demographic that we want. We also have the ability to just stack the satisfaction questions very easily, and I think I showed you some of this last month, and say, what are the top 10 things that the overall population or any subpopulation have as the things with which they are either most satisfied or least satisfied? In this one, I put highest dissatisfaction, but you could call this least satisfied. This is measured by what got the most ones and twos. And again, I've used the race or ethnicity, and I've used the Black respondents and white respondents. The interesting thing here to show you is everywhere there's a blue line from the left to the right is a blue line where it was one of the top 10 issues or top 10 least satisfied services from both Black and white respondents. There are a few things that are different, and you can, again, we can go as far down the rabbit hole as you want with this type of information. And some of the percentages change. So it may be 68% dissatisfaction versus 59% dissatisfaction. But that street parking in downtown is the number one issue for both highest dissatisfaction for Black respondents and white respondents. The top four are exactly the same. There is no difference at all. And as you get down the list, you'll see things like on the left side, the demolishing vacant structures that are nuisance properties is in the top 10. That's actually number 12 if you go over to the white respondents. So it's not in the top 10, but it's really close. Again, hammering home the idea or notion that there's not as much variation as people might think there are in what priorities are for the overall community, even when you get to some of the subpopulations. So we can do any of this type of data mining that you want to do as well, which is kind of just ranking services and looking at what's, kind of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If you wanted us to do that, we can do that kind of data analysis. The other one, and I told you about this last month, and I've used the example of Wista, and again, done some screenshots from the dashboard, is what is the overall satisfaction with Wista fixed route service? And then the caveat thereof, instead of using some of the what we would call regular demographic data, we've pulled the question of, do you use the Wista, or have you used the Wista system in the last year? And as you can see, the folks on the left indicated that they used it. The folks on the right indicated that they hadn't. Both satisfaction and dissatisfaction go up because the neutral goes down. This was you get a lot of folks that answer neutral to questions that don't use a service. Wista is one of those. Again, there's a very high neutral rate when you say, I'm not using the service. You've got over half of the respondents who are a 3 out of 5 on Wista, probably because not that they care that much about it, but they just don't know overall. So it is interesting to see that when we ask that, satisfaction and dissatisfaction amongst users is at the same proportional level, essentially, that it is for non-users. Anyways, we can do this with recreation data. We can look at rec centers. We can look at youth programming, and we can cut that by people that have actually used rec centers. We can look at police level law enforcement data and cut it by people who have indicated that they have had an experience of some kind with law enforcement. We can look at how people rate CityLink and whether or not they have indicated that they have used CityLink. So this is an area where we could show you a lot of data. Again, there are about 20 of these questions and probably another 40 or 50 that they would apply to. So I can show you a lot of visualizations, but I'm going to ask you, and again, I can go through at the end here and talk about specific service areas, but how far do you want to dig into some of these, and do you want to look at them? Again, Brandon will do some of this organically, and we'll provide you some additional details next month if we don't get specific direction, but we're capable of doing this kind of stuff with the data as well. So this is where I stop talking for just a little bit, and I ask CBAC to unmute, and I basically pose that question to you. Where do you want to see more data? Do you want us to dig and show you things that are really high-level strategic priorities around housing, code enforcement, neighborhood aesthetics, and law enforcement, infrastructure maintenance? Are you much more interested just in the levels that have the highest dissatisfaction, or again, lowest satisfaction? Would you prefer to spend more time looking at those? Or realistically, do you have areas or things that you're hearing in the community? You are an appointed body that represents the community in an advisory capacity to city council. What is it that you hear, that you see, that you would like to dig into? And so this is where I'm either going to pass or fail on getting the group to give us some ideas on where you want to dig. Again, we'll bring you some more of the data, even if you don't ask for it at specific levels. But before I went out and created a whole bunch of visuals that you didn't want to see, I want to ask, what do you want to see? How do you want to see it? So this is, feel free to unmute. You can start at a question level. And again, if you think about the service areas, we're asking about public safety. We're asking about transportation and transit. We're asking about environmental health, so stormwater and sustainability. We're asking about code enforcement a lot and neighborhood aesthetics from a minimum housing code, weeded lots, junked vehicles, litter on private property. What are the types of areas you're interested in looking at?
Hey,
Bring up
Scott,
the listing of the areas.
yes.
Can we bring up the listing of the areas?
Yeah, like it's hard to these are three good suggestions, but let's bring up the total listing that was in, I think the survey is probably helpful to think through as the menu for
Give me a
myself.
couple of seconds on the back end to find an appropriate visual for that. I will bring something up, but feel free to chime in.
So Scott, didn't you also at one point have a comparison of how we were relative to peer cities?
We do. We
Like whether or not we,
have-
does everyone complain about, housing code everywhere? Are we uniquely bad? I think that'd be interesting to see is what are we particularly bad at relative to other cities or comparable cities? And the other thing, just in terms of, I live just outside downtown. I spend most of my time either, on campus or downtown or West End. Two things that come, sidewalks and parking are the two things everyone complains about all the time. Our sidewalks suck. And I don't have an issue with the parking downtown, but I know plenty of people who do.
So I'm going to try and drag something over here that's going to answer your second question, maybe not your first one, Fred. And I'm hoping, did the visual change for you? You're seeing a whole bunch of bar charts? Okay.
Yes.
So this is when you're talking about the benchmarking data, excuse me, this is the benchmarking data. And again, we've got hours in dark blue. The Atlantic average is kind of it's not Carolina blue, but cerulean blue. And then the US average is in red. And we have, we can look at different ways. You got to clear all the filters to get it back. Sorry. Once you start messing with one part of the dashboard, it messes with everything else. But we can look at, like over here, top opportunities. Where do we have the largest variance from those benchmarks? So this is just the benchmarking data, and we can't dive obviously into demographic. I can't tell you what the African American folks on
I will
average.
say that first one is absolutely no surprise to me.
Yes. So this is the one we had intended to have somebody from the city attorney's office and DOT. Schedules didn't line up, so we're going to bring them to you next month to talk about that. But again, maintenance of city streets, we are below the averages. Bicycle infrastructure, condition of sidewalks. So this is where I showed you last month. There's a lot of that transportation infrastructure stuff where we're a little bit below the benchmarks. And we can go kind of as far down that rabbit hole as you want as well. On the flip side of that is I want to make sure that we also look at this one up here at the top, and you may not be able to see it. I can't see it because of the screen share icon, but there are a lot of areas where we're better too. And particularly, this is interesting to me. Our solid waste collection services, for the most part, are benchmarked significantly higher than those other communities. We get a lot of calls at CityLink about brush. We get a lot of calls at CityLink about refuse. We get a lot of calls about you missed my recycling. But overall, the community is not nearly as disappointed as they are in other communities with those services. So I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, from our perspective, it means maybe we're providing or perceived to be providing a better service than in other places that are struggling even more than we are. I don't think there's anywhere where you're going to get 90, 100% of the people are on board with your sanitation services, just because there's always a miss. And you get things like the snow and ice events happened where you couldn't collect stuff. And that's led to all types of service problems where people have packed more trash into the top of a trash can, which actually makes it more difficult for the operator to dump. Very few people know this. When that kind of things happens, the city would actually rather you take the excess garbage bags and just sit them next to the bin rather than putting them in the top of the bin. But there's all kinds of service issues that come along with inclement weather in that. But yes, to your second question, Fred, we do have all of this. can absolutely just give you and the public access to this data, or can again bring it back and go through any level of data you want us to. But generally speaking, we have this dashboard viewed shows these are the actual percentages versus the benchmarks. And then the right side shows the variance from the benchmark by highest and lowest in terms of where you're doing well in opportunities. But yeah, we can absolutely, again, some of your recommendations to city council may be very specifically in transportation maintenance, where we are not, from a perception perspective, at the level that our peers are experiencing in their communities. But Fred, I can stop there and ask any questions you want. The other question you asked was service area level. So we can think about it by departments. And again, all of these dashboards, you can actually, we build some of these for internal purposes for police. So Chief Penn and his staff can actually go in, click on this and find, well, and it doesn't update. Of course, it would do that in real time, but they are built on the back end so that they can sort individual questions and look at the variances that relate to the services that they provide. Let me drag this back out of the way and see if I can find either the report or another one of these visuals that'll give you the kind of service area levels. It may be that I just go and get a copy of the actual survey tool itself that has it's easier to see the services we ask about there.
Scott, while we're on that topic and you're kind of navigating, I think that is an interesting way to drill down into it a little more. When you go back to the previous bar chart, right? I think that you see clusters for fire services, right? They're all kind of clustered in the same spot. For police, right? We see based on the exact question or the exact type of service that is provided, or the responsibility, then we see a lot more variation. That becomes a little bit more interesting to me. I'm with Fred on the like cities regional breakdowns. I think those are really, really interesting. But I think when we start to look at, for police specifically, the types of services they provide and the satisfaction of those, like visibility, one thing, right? But crime prevention, another. And I think that is what I would like to see a little bit more detail on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, from what you've shown so far, I think we should congratulate our solid waste people on doing a great job and not talk about them anymore, really, because they're great, it seems like. To me, it's like where we are doing poorly at, which, that those top opportunities seem to be the place where I would think we'd want to focus is, what is the city doing bad at?
And a lot of those top opportunities seem to be things that are achievable through some budget discussions. Like they're not these huge nebulous issues. It's litter collection and things that maybe we can move the needle on.
Okay, so and I'm going to ask some questions I hear. So when we say focus on things that we're not doing as good at, we mean that from the perspective of the benchmarks, things where we're either US or Atlantic lower, not just focus on which ones have the most negative perception, right?
I would advocate for that just in the sense that,
Okay.
Other cities comparable to us are doing better at this. So clearly it's an achievable thing to improve. While if you just look at the things they're least satisfied about, it might be something that no one's figured out how to do well.
Parking.
Jeff will be here next week to talk about ADA. We'll let him talk about parking or next month. We'll let him talk about parking too. There's obviously a lot going on there in the community. I don't know how much time y'all spend on Facebook. I probably spend too much time on Facebook, on the city's Facebook page. And the Journal actually posted something recently that Greater Winston-Salem Inc. was doing as promoting going out for local businesses and helping folks out after the snow and ice events to get local businesses going again. And it was a litany of comments about parking. There was very little about thank you for trying to help these individuals. It was all parking related. So I think that is obviously one that we've seen in the data change very drastically in the last 2 years, and one that I would say management is aware of, as well as council. So those are areas potentially that you can make some recommendations to look at something as well. I will try and drag this over. I will say unfortunately, this may be the best on short notice in terms of like the areas that we ask questions. This is the actual survey tool. So we're talking about questions that are this is at the top, we ask the overall questions. And if we've not screen shared this before, overall image of the city, quality of the city, availability of jobs, availability of affordable housing, kind of those types of things. We then ask the questions about communicating with CityLink. We ask marketing questions about how do you want to get your information. We ask how do you get it, and then how do you want to get it. And those, again, we can break down by demographics too and show you. Imagine this, the older populations would prefer things that are in print and on TV, and the younger populations want things that tend more towards direct social media engagement. And then we get to, so police and fire services, public safety questions, specifically about, kind of how the services are delivered from a police perspective. We have visibility of police, overall efforts to prevent crime, enforcement of traffic laws. So kind of that public safety area, we ask questions. Streets, transportation, and public transit, so kind of all encompassing transportation, whether that's infrastructure or the bus system, bicycle infrastructure, maintenance along city roads, that kind of stuff. I think litter along city roads is in there as well, so a little bit of the operating piece. Neighborhood services, not as many questions here, but again, this is really kind of focused on are there abandoned properties that may need to be remediated or demolished? Again, the growth of vegetation on private property, exterior maintenance of residential property, those types of things that are housing code enforcement violations. Again, you could get into the data of where do those happen. We can actually show you where the housing code violations happen versus where the perceptions of those are, kind of thing. Recreation services, so parks, rec centers, athletics programming, swimming pools, those types of things. From a solid waste perspective, again, we've got trash, recycling, bulky item, leaf collection, brush, and street sweeping. And then this was our first stab this year, kind of at the stormwater and sustainability questions. There are a lot of cities that are venturing into these sustainability related questions, and we tried to get there. So the overall categories are kind of solid waste, public safety, transportation infrastructure and operations, environmental health, and kind of code enforcement and housing. Again, if there are any of those specific areas that you want to dive a lot further into, or we could, again, look at the data and recommend some places for you to dive a little further in the future. I do see, Jamesina, you've got your hand up. I'm sorry, I was staring at my other screen and didn't see the hand raised.
Oh no, that's okay. So one thing that I wanted to just throw out there while we're kind of thinking through our survey results is that usually or typically, whenever you're doing surveys, your most dissatisfied people and your most satisfied people are the most likely to respond, period. And so we got to kind of keep that in mind. I mean, I know that we kind of have to derive a strategy for what we want to present as recommendations and as we're looking at some of these, but I think it's important to keep in mind that, and two, do we have the most representative sample? We don't know. I mean, the surveys go out and the people that respond are the people that wanted to respond. So yes, we could take some direction, but I think like Scott was saying, it's super important to keep in mind too as we go through this process of trying to decide like what we're going to pull forward and what things from a budget perspective we're going to try to kind of lock in on a little bit or delve a little bit more. But I think we just have to be careful about making recommendations about resources just based on kind of what we're seeing in the dissatisfaction areas of this survey, because generally speaking, if you just think about us as consumers, if you have a regular experience at your local sandwich shop, you're typically not going to say anything. that's not a time that you're going to go to Yelp. And like if you just go get your sandwich every Tuesday and there's no issue, you didn't get any great service, you didn't get any bad service, your sandwich is made as it always is, you typically don't have much to say, right? But if you go in and there's some amazing experience, you might be more inclined to respond or take the survey or do whatever. Or if your sandwich was completely jacked up and wrong, right? Then you're going to be. So I just wonder, when we're talking about this survey and we're looking at the highest satisfaction, the lowest satisfaction, you talked about margin of error, but I'm thinking about it more like not in an error way, but in a, do we really, is this really where most of the responding citizens feel we need to focus resources based on that dissatisfaction level? Or when you're mad, you're going to be more inclined to fill out the survey, right? So do we really in that area feel that way? I'm just curious as to like how much do we how much stock do we put on these dissatisfaction levels that arose in this survey? I mean, just for everyone, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. I'm curious as to how do we as a team really look at what our recommendations will be based on what we're seeing.
So I'll offer two things there. And he said, I see your hand up too. I'll get you here in just a sec. They are randomly selected households to do this. Now, the response rate is not what we would like it to be, which introduces a selection bias and response bias in and of itself. Having said that, you do see a lot of things that are highly satisfied. And so I don't think what you're getting is every single person who's filling out the survey is someone who is disgruntled. I do think that you are right to consider that there is some amount of response bias in that the response rate is lower than we would want it to be. And that happens across all municipalities. That's not something that's unique to us. In talking to ECC, I think we're a hair lower than some of our peer communities. But we are not, by any stretch of the imagination, the only people who are getting response rates what they are. Response rates historically used to be a lot higher. I think people just have more things in front of them and maybe less time to do that. I would say, generally speaking, though, this is how the community feels. The fact that something is an 86 and something's an 88, I wouldn't worry about the difference between that. But if we're looking at benchmarking differences and we are 8, 10, 15, 20% difference, there is some kind of statistically significant difference there, and is an area that we would want to look at. So I do think, yes, the margin of error is 3%, the confidence interval at 95%. Again, if you're in that 3, 4, 5 range, maybe you don't worry about it as much. But if you're getting to the 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 plus variance, there is something that's happening there. And the potential response bias is probably not what's causing that at all. So it is very good to bring up and understand that completely. And I don't have a way to tell you the response bias is exactly this amount because of the response rate. But it is something to keep in mind. Absolutely. Hey, Senna, you've had your hand up.
Yes. Kind of sort of like what Jasmine just went through, but mine's is a little different with a question into the services that we provide. Is there any data that relates to, did the services go down to the dissatisfaction level because of that service being contracted out versus how well was that service offered with just the city in mind before it went down a level or two levels, or how many levels it went down? Number two, when it comes to you mentioned something earlier about the age group, the 18 to 24. And questioning how often were the surveys sent out to the residents? Was there a follow-up? Because I know that in certain areas of the city, if it was by mail, some of our mail services has gone down tremendously. And so that kind of knocks people out if they receiving information by mail versus by social media or through their phone. So those are just some questions as what are the questions? I think we should ask questions such as these to find out how true the data is that we're receiving. Because if there was good service, say with sidewalks, say 5 years ago, our sidewalks were great or in good condition. Now, 5 years later, they are not so good, but a big issue being dissatisfied. Was the service provided with contractors or was the service provided with workers actually from the city?
But great questions. Let me give you one example of this that literally popped to mind. And again, I'll drag this back over. There's a couple of different examples of this from a service delivery change example. So this is the overall quality of curbside recycling over time. And so green again is satisfied, and you've got red is dissatisfied. It really hasn't changed over time. From when we started doing these, you saw a little bit of a dip, but all 1-2%, again, that's within a margin of error. I'm not calling this a difference. We did change from contracted service to city-run service a couple of years ago. And realistically, you've seen no change in the perception from a community-wide perspective of curbside recycling. I think anecdotally, people say the service is better, and that sounds great, but instead of dealing in anecdotes, when you look at the actual data, there really isn't that much of a difference. Hey, so that is a very interesting question. There are lots of things. So you have the contractor versus city staff thing, but you'd also have all kinds of interesting things like with streets. This is streets and sidewalks. But we put a significant amount of money into streets in different intervals in bond packages, but then we put $3 million more a year in motor vehicle privilege tax into this as a budget process. And so we would expect over time to potentially see some of the streets maintenance metrics, maybe not in the short term because it takes a while, but would they start trending up over the course of several years? Again, when you think about streets maintenance, we pump in $3 million. There is $300 million worth of streets to resurface. So it takes cycles and cycles of years to get there. But those are some that he said is going to get me to thinking, where have we changed a service? And we know that we've made some type of implementation change, either from a resource perspective or from just some type of other programmatic change. And would we see those? And I would ask you, are there, like I said, recycling and streets come to mind for me. Are there ones that come to mind for y'all where you would have expected to see something go up or down? Parking is a great example of that. Again, parking we know is a kind of much more significant issue to residents. Let's see here. Ease and availability of public parking. Again, where we were to where we are now, we made a significant parking change, and obviously you had a 15% increase in dissatisfaction from just 2 years ago with downtown parking. So yeah, there are some of those we're going in the wrong direction, but are there areas you'd like to look into that? And parking has come up a couple of times, so I'm going to leave parking on the list of things that y'all are probably going to have something to say about in a report.
Yeah, I mean, and on that front, I think that parking in particular is one where some like city or regional comparisons would be super helpful. Because we know that we've tried some things, it hasn't necessarily worked, right? If we're going to start to make recommendations, right, it's obviously front of mind, right? There's no really avoiding that. But the question is, are we just going to keep banging our heads against the wall, or is there something we can actually recommend that's a workable solution or can change that score a little bit, whether it's information or whether it's actual policy, practice, spending, whatever. I think that we would be doing a disservice to the exercise if we're ignoring the top priority, but also don't want to overemphasize something that doesn't have real actionable solutions.
Yeah, I don't think the parking one is one of the benchmarking questions. There are
Scott,
46 or 53 of those.
How many of these questions do we have benchmarking data for?
Yeah, it's about 50 of them. I'd have to go back. 46 and 53 is in my mind, but it's in the range of about 50 questions. When you look at here on the left side, like that's
all.
That's all of them.
How
Yeah.
many questions were asked again? I forgot.
More than 100. So it's less than half of what
Okay,
we
so
asked questions of.
that's important. Is we only have benchmarking on about half the things that were asked.
Less than half, yeah.
Okay, so also, is this benchmarking data and the time series data you just showed, is that in the 400-page report?
No.
Oh, so how are we going to be able to see that?
Okay, so I will send you two things. We will send you the cross-tabular data is the 400-page report. And if we have not sent it already, I will also send you the full survey report, which will have, again, I'll drop it back over here. It's 140 pages long, and in an email, we'll highlight that information for you.
Sure.
But it's about half of the way down here,
Good.
national benchmarks.
There we go.
So again,
And what
we will
about
give you
what about the time series data going
the
back?
time series for benchmarks.
Well, the ones you were showing, where you had,
The
2020,
trending data?
2021, 2022. Yeah, that right there. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we'll give you access to the dashboard, but this is
Okay.
specifically in the dashboard. The ETC report will suggest areas where they've seen trend changes, but there's no way for them to show you the trend of every question in that style of report. It's just, you start doing that, those reports get to be 1,000 pages long kind of thing. Again, this goes back to, I will send you the paper documents that we get, and then we will send also next week. Brandon had right before he left was about to turn on the 2025 data publicly, but we need to do a little more QA/QC. We will turn it on next week, and we'll send you a link, and you'll be able to get to some of these visualizations, and we can actually share other ones publicly if you want to see them. There are some of these, and I realize I'm kind of scrolling back and forth between things here. Some of these visualizations are really kind of, like I said, more of that data digging, data mining type thing. And you have to be very careful in making sure that you clear data before you use it and turn off filters and that kind of stuff. So people who aren't familiar with a Power BI dashboard that's got 15 different tabs in it will forget to go turn the filters off in one that's related to another. And then you're like, I've done this a couple of times too. I forget, like, well, that does not look correct at all. And you realize you got to go back. So we try to not release quite as much to the public, not because we don't want to give the data and be transparent, but because we don't want to cause data analysis problems for kind of just the average user. But we will make this type of information available to you. And again, I would tell you, you have to be very careful. This thing is built such that you can look at the trend data and can say, what do the people in the East Ward think about parking over time versus what do the people in the West Ward think about? So there's a 23% difference. There's a 10% difference over time from 49 to 60. Now, again, people got a lot happier for a short period of time and then got really irritated again. But that's part of that. You can dive in the data forever and just spend hours and hours and hours losing yourself. I would come back to what is actionable data. And I think parking is one of those, we can show you, bring you back some stuff, but it is just evident and apparent from, it doesn't even matter the demographic component of it, that there is an issue with the implementation of parking and its immediate perception shortly hereafter. So I will say we are kind of an hour and 15 minutes into what is scheduled to be an hour and a half. I love the questions that are coming forward, and I've got several notes here. Hey, Seta, you had a second question. So you had the service related question, and then you had the one about how are we asking, and can get you kind of a longer response to that. But essentially, the methodology for the survey is they send out a letter, and they start with address-based stuff first. So you send a letter in advance saying the survey is coming. You then send a letter with the survey in a self-addressed stamped envelope. It has a QR code and a link on it. The vast majority of people actually fill this out online via that link. When they buy those addresses, they also buy addresses that have email addresses associated with them. They don't send the email until they see a response rate that's not working for them from the paper side. Then they'll start that. And if they have to, they'll actually start calling people when they have the numbers that are associated with those addresses and physically trying to get people to either answer it on the phone, or get them encouraged enough to go online and answer it from a phone call follow-up. So there is a kind of a prescription of follow-up that they do for the respondents that they are trying to go after. Okay, so I'm staring down. I know, very interested again. We will dive further into the benchmarking data, particularly the negative variance thing. But with Fred also saying, make sure that we have praise and positive kudos for the areas where we are doing things differently. Parking is obviously an area that we're very interested in. I will also say we've got non-random data that we have not had a chance to go through yet. We'll show you that in the coming months. So this is all the randomized data. We do, after this completes, just send it out and let anyone answer it. Jamesina, that's when we get to that real response bias of, we have seen in years where one organization has sent out massive amounts of newsletters and things, and all of a sudden bicycle infrastructure becomes the single most important thing, or sustainability becomes the most important thing. So we'll see and show you some variances there, which might kind of hopefully validate the idea that we've got a decent response profile from the randomized data compared to the non-randomized data. You have talked, there's been a couple of comments here about public safety, so we will go into more depth specifically in the 5 or 6 public safety, and I'm going to say police and law enforcement related ones. I can dive into the fire ones. There's usually not as much there, but we can dive into fire as well. But there's about 7 or 8 questions there that we can pull from the 5 or 6 demographics and show you, do we see anything subpopulation wise that looks interesting? Other areas that you would be more interested than others to dive into, but that gives us a very good starting point for where to show you visuals next month, where to build things out in the dashboard for next for an agenda for next month.
So, Scott, one more question before we leave. So we're looking at these top opportunities. Do we have these by ward?
So you're talking about this?
Yeah, the top opportunities. Because do we know like how these vary within our city?
So I don't know that we have a visual specifically built that links the benchmark variance to, but yeah, absolutely, we can do that. Yes.
Okay. Well, because I'm just thinking some of these things look like they might have ward variance.
Negative, yeah. Benchmark variance. Geography. We can absolutely do that. And I'm not going to overpromise here, but we might be able to map it too, and just color code a map for some of those questions.
That'd be cool.
Brandon's going to come back on Monday and lose his mind and all the stuff. So. Tony?
You beat me to it with the map, because that was going to be my next question. But I do have one other thing, and it'll come off as a little self-serving because I am a sustainability professional. But I'm more interested in not necessarily sustainability specifically, but questions or where there's clusters of kind of neutral responses or uninformed. Right. That what I'm looking for is where people have less knowledge rather than where they have strong opinions. And sustainability, just because you said we're kind of introducing that, or we have in the past, is what jumped out. But when we talked about the recycling program, right, do people actually know that we switched to private contractors rather than offering as a public service, right? Like, I think that where we can hone in on knowledge gaps would be an interesting way to explore both future questions from the survey perspective, but also maybe gain some insights that we might be otherwise ignoring because of those neutral response rates.
Yes, very good questions. So
I don't know if there's a way to explore that necessarily, but if we do see kind of strong clusters of neutral.
So we do, and Wista was one of those examples, and I'm going to keep dragging this stuff
Right.
back and forth, and I apologize this. When somebody watches this on YouTube later, they're going to have to deal with this, but I'm like, when we're talking specifically about the sustainability questions, you can see the blue is the neutral, and you can see
Yeah.
clusterings of investments in alternative fuels and renewable energies where you're getting people, but I can't tell you whether that's someone's
Right.
level of disinterest in answering the question or lack of knowledge, or the fact that they're just yeah, I don't really care. Well, I'm knowledgeable in the area, but I'm not gung-ho and I'm not against it either. It's just hey, if you're doing it, kind of glad that you're doing it.
Yeah.
Don't have a way to do that, but I can show you the clusterings of kind of those neutral responses in areas, but we don't have a way to dive down and know exactly what the respondents were thinking in those areas.
Yeah, I think we could probably make some educated guesses.
Sure. I'd be happy to grab those for you and show the areas where we have, well, I'll say anywhere where we have anything greater than a third of the respondents are in a neutral area. One third now. All right. Before we go any further, I'm done with the slides that I had. Like I said, wanted to stop at this area and again, make sure that we're talking about actionable data when we're looking at this. We want to keep that in the back of our minds all the time. What would we do differently? What would we communicate differently? How would city council make a directive to a department, or how would a department recommend a direction to city council for a change in something? We will send you, again, the 2023 data is out there. We'll load 2025, will be coming soon. I will send you this link personally next week once we've gotten that data loaded. It's we QA/QC'd appropriately to make sure that we've got what we need, and we'll release you to that. So I will send you, unfortunately, a 170-page paper report that is the just overall. I will send you the 400 pages worth of crosstabs, and I will send you the dashboard link. But we have some specific things that we're going to go back and dive and create visuals for you to bring back for next month. We'll talk about non-randomized data next month, and I will have hopefully someone from the city attorney and DOT to talk about that ADA accessibility with sidewalks component, what we're doing with ADA evaluations, and then Jeff can also speak to parking. He's had quite a few opportunities to do that. Jeff Fansler, our DOT director, who's over top of our on-street and off-street parking programs. So we potentially have quite a bit of information coming to you, and then also a full agenda for next month with respect to looking at some of this. I would also say, do not hesitate to send me an email and say, hey, I thought of this. I'd love to see this, or I'd love to see you dive into this a little bit. We are more than happy to do that for you. But I think we've got a decent direction to head down here for next month, and then maybe come up with a lot more questions and dive even further next month. That was, we'll say overall some of the intent here. I do want to remember there were agenda items that we wanted to get to. So if we are kind of done with the data exploration component of this, we do have two really quick items agenda-wise to get to. The first is chair and vice chair selection. I know quite a few of you have been either chair or vice chair once in your tenure already. I would say at this point, you may recommend someone else or you may recommend yourself. But as a public board, we do need a recommendation and ultimately a vote of the group for someone. We'll do chair first. Again, chair really kind of helps to a certain extent with the agendas to make sure that we're staying on course. But the main thing that you do is come to city council and provide a presentation of the recommendations of CBAC. That generally takes place in, I'm going to call it the May or June timeframe. It is associated either with a finance committee meeting or with one of the budget workshops, and you get your 10 minutes. Staff will build the report that CBAC ultimately adopts. We will build the presentation for you, and we will provide annotated speaker's notes for the presentation as well. So we will try and get you in a good spot to succeed there. But the main thing that the chair does is realistically providing that. The vice chair just operates the meetings, and in the absence of the chair, and if the chair is unable to make that public presentation, we would then have the vice chair have the opportunity to make that public presentation, again with staff providing you whatever resources you feel comfortable with and need in that. So I will be quiet, and I will allow someone to recommend someone and hopefully accept that recommendation. don't all jump at once.
I would ask if anyone is particularly interested in the role. Feel free to self-identify as well.
I think we will also have one extra member coming, new assignee next month as well. They may not in their first meeting want to have any of that thrown on them, but I think we do have another member being appointed by the mayor and city council for next month. So I think Jamesina, Fred, Haysetta, Tony, you guys have all served in roles.
I was the chair twice, so I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was 3 times, so no.
So someone's only been it once?
That would be me, but I will happily step aside.
It's not that bad, I promise.
Or not, right? Yeah. All honesty, right? It's an interesting opportunity if you've never been before city council and have those conversations, sitting through those meetings. And I think Scott and team make everything pretty simple, both in organizing our monthly meetings and also that presentation. So yeah, that's my pitch.
Not hearing a lot of folks that want to be in charge this year. I'd prefer not to carry this over to next month if we don't have to.
I nominate Tony.
Is there a second of that nomination?
I second.
Tony, how do you feel?
If need be, I'm fine with that. Yeah, though I would say that I do think it is smart to continue to cycle. So I would say I will do it for this year, but would cycle off as the plan.
Okay.
Whether to somebody who would like to be vice chair or somebody who is neither.
If no one else steps up to the plate and wants to be the chair, I think we'll take an official vote on whether Tony will serve as the chair again this year. Not seeing any hands raised to that extent. So for an official vote, if you would unmute and just say yes and or raise your hand so that I can see you, we will take the vote that way. Got hands raised, hand raised.
Yes.
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 Got a yes, and looks like that is
Yes.
unanimous. Tony, congratulations.
Thank you for your faith in whatever it is that I can or everyone.
From a vice chair perspective, is there anyone who'd like to serve in that capacity? Again, you could do the vice chair and then be the chair in the following year if it's something you haven't done. Jamesina, are you offering as tribute there?
Yes, I offer myself as tribute for vice chair for Tony this year. With no I'm not throwing my hat in the ring for chair next year at this point, but right now I'm offering myself as vice chair for Tony.
Fair enough. Is there a second for that recommendation?
I will gladly second that.
Okay. Assuming nobody else wants to do that, are there other nominations? Not seeing anything. I'll scroll over here. Looks like everyone is okay with that. We will do the same thing again. If you will unmute, say yes, raise your right hand or left.
Yes.
Give us the vote.
Yes.
Yes.
We got one from Emily. Okay. All right. I think that is also unanimous. All right. We have a chair and vice chair for this year. Perfect. Last thing on the agenda before we slide out of here was adoption of the minutes. I believe those were sent out in advance, if I am correct. If no one has any changes there too, would allow for.
I just have one change.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct spelling of my last name. Take the C out.
We will get that worked out for you, Haysetta.
And I
Microsoft
noticed
Teams-
bringing it up. And I noticed that it said we adjourned at like 9:25.
Has it got the wrong time on it?
Yeah.
25. Okay. Let me go back to the video and we will change the adjournment to the actual time. That may be a slip. We will check. Pending those changes, are there other issues noticed there? I think we could adopt with edits as needed there. If there's nothing else substantial from a materiality perspective.
Make a motion to approve with those changes pending.
All right.
Second.
Motion in a second. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 All right, we will have minutes adopted with corrections and edits as needed for spelling and adjournment time. That is all I have. Does anyone else have anything for the good of the committee here? And if not, seeing a lot of head shaking, Tony, feel free to send us to
Motion to
adjournment as the chair.
Anyone want to second my motion to adjourn?
Second.
Right. And yeah, so look forward to the next minutes and various information coming out. Scott's going to share a bunch. That's awesome. We'll lean on Fred to read all of the pages and give us all the notes. But otherwise, yeah, guess we have a second to adjourn. All in favor? All right, y'all.
All right, adjournment at
Bye-bye.
11 o'clock. Sorry, Fred, for
Bye-bye.
the homework. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Tony.